Sierra, and it's good to be back this week. This week's update is especially special to me because my partial set of dreadlocks is turning 1 year old. Birthday! Happy birthday! Okay. In this update, I really just wanted to touch base and show you guys what my dreadlocks look like at 1 year, and also kind of give you an expectation versus reality, at least for myself when I started dreadlocks. And I kind of wanted to answer the number one question that I had before I got dreadlocks, and that's, what would they look like at 12 months? You know, everybody says just kind of give it to that 1 year mark and your dreadlocks will finally start to look like dreadlocks. And I'm here to kind of give you some insight into whether you can or cannot expect your dreadlocks to be mature by 12 months old. For those of you that are just tuning into my channel for the very first time, welcome! It's good to have you. I'm glad you've stopped by to check out and see what's going on. I currently have a partial set of 9 dreadlocks located in the bottom half of my head back here. I did install them all myself, and I installed them using the twist and rip method. I will be installing another row of dreadlocks here very shortly, so if you think that's something that you might be interested in, then consider subscribing to stay in tune with my updates. If you're a returning subscriber, it is good to have you back. As always, I am happy to see you. So as I kind of mentioned before I got started with my partial set of dreadlocks, my number one question was, how long is it going to take dreadlocks to mature? And I am here to kind of try to help to clear some of that up a little bit. So as I mentioned, my dreadlocks are 12 months old, and I would say that the majority of my dreadlocks have gotten pretty close to mature. And I think the biggest difference and how you know the difference is just simply what they feel like. When you first get started with dreadlocks, you're going to have really thin or really frizzy dreads. They're not going to look anything like mature dreadlocks, and as proud of them as you are at that stage, they get much better once they start to mature. So my lip tips are still a little wet. I actually washed my hair this morning, and as many of you know, it takes forever to dreadlocks to dry. So my tips are still a little damp this morning, but I can kind of show you with this dreadlock here that, you know, I've got a big section here that is fully matured. It's knotted, it's thick, it's got lots of hair tucked into the inside of this dreadlock. And then you notice down here at the end, so my loose tips start right here, so I'm just going to pinch that off so you don't see it. But as you can see from here, my dreadlocks start to get much thinner. So from here to here, this is still the area of my dreadlock that is waiting to mature. So we have mature dreadlock, still maturing dreadlock. In the grand scope, they're mostly there, but I can't say my dreadlocks are fully mature because some of them still have this little tail that's left, you know, working on developing its knot and developing its thickness. Other dreadlocks, for instance, like this one, is pretty much the same length the whole way down and is pretty much matured all that it's going to mature. It's just going to continue to lengthen at this point. And what I've really noticed is that my thinner dreadlocks matured all the way down to the ends first. Like these behind my ears or in sections that just had a little bit less hair. And then dreadlocks that were a little bit thicker or had a little bit more hair are just taking a little bit longer. So once again, like with this dreadlock, you can see I've got super thick, meaty knots all the way down to this point. And then from here to here, it's still really thin. And I'm gonna try to tighten some of this frizzy hair up around it so you can see just how thin it actually gets. But once again, my loose tips start about right here, so I'm covering that up so it doesn't confuse you. But in between my two fingers here are still what I would consider immature dreadlock sections. So while the majority of the length is looking really good and looking like mature dreadlocks, I would be lying if I said that my dreadlocks are fully there at 1 year old. Another big question I had before I started dreadlocks was, how would you know when your dreadlocks were mature? And I would kind of tell you that the biggest difference is just the way the knots form. So when your dreadlocks are baby dreads and they're new dreads, the actual center knot line of them, they may be frizzy looking, but the actual center knot is a really thin string of knots on the inside. And I noticed that the first set of my dreadlocks maturing happened around the 3-month mark, and it was obvious. I mean, I had these long, really super skinny dreadlocks. Let's see if I can find one that's a little bit longer. But I had these long, super skinny dreadlocks, and then right at the base, so mine started maturing up here at the base first. And what I noticed is that I had this super long skinny dreadlock all the way down, and then right at the base you had this like super thick chunky section where knots have just like exploded in thickness and width, and that is what it starts to look like when your dreadlocks start to mature. So you will definitely know when the maturing starts, and to me that was kind of that like whew, relief moment of like, okay, these babies are gonna do what I think they're gonna do, life is good, dreads are good, I can kind of relax about the situation now. Kind of tying into this point here, a question that I get a lot is, am I happy with my current dreadlock sizes? Now, wondering what size my dreadlocks would eventually be is one reason why I started with partial dreadlocks to start with. I definitely wanted kind of a certain look for my dreads. I like them to be a little bit tidier and a little bit better maintained, and I'll touch base on that again in a second. But the size of my overall dreads was a big decision for me to kind of wait a little while before I installed any more. So now that I'm a year in and I've seen about how they're going to mature and at least about how thick they're going to get in comparison to their original size, I can kind of give you some insight on whether or not the thickness is about what I expected. So I personally love the thickness of my dreads. I wanted a little bit of a thinner dreadlock, so I went with slightly smaller sections. Now, as you can tell, I do have fine hair. You know, my hair doesn't have a lot of texture to it, and I don't have just a ton of it as far as volume goes. So my dreadlock parts were what I would consider standard size for most. I think they were like just under 1 inch by 1 inch, so maybe 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch all the way around. So with that in mind, your dreadlock sections will determine a large part of how large your dreadlocks get. I personally had some help parting the back half of my head since it's in the back and it's down low back here and it's really hard for me to see. I had some help getting the sections at least originally parted and installed and rubber banded. From there, I did all of the installation with the twist and rip method myself. I think my husband helped with like one dreadlock. I just wanted him to have a part of it and, you know, whatever. But for the most part, I installed the majority of my dreadlocks. And the biggest thing I would notice is that their size also depends on how thick your hair grows in that particular section of your head. So for example, the sections around the perimeter of my scalp, so these that are right behind my ear, the ones that are right behind my ear on this side, as well as right here at the nape of my neck, these sections just don't grow as much hair as the sections that are actually more so in the middle of my head. So even though all of my sections were about the same size, I definitely have some dreadlocks that ended up a little bigger than other dreadlocks did, and honestly I think that's kind of the beauty of dreadlocks. They all take a personality of their own and they all kind of form the way they are intended to form, and so even though I went with a very uniform look and parted all of my sections very similar size, each one of my dreadlocks has very much ended up its own unique size and it has its own unique look just due to the way hair grows in different thicknesses around the scalp. Another big question that I had before I got dreadlocks was how hard would it be to keep dreadlocks separated? Personally, I really haven't had a whole lot of issues with this, but I also stay on top of it pretty regularly. So most times when I get out of the shower, I go ahead and separate. You know, if I ever notice that there are issues of hairs crossing over sections, I go ahead and take care of them immediately just because I don't want it to become a bigger problem. I've heard how painful it can be to separate dreadlocks once they start to grow together, so I have wanted to avoid that at all costs. So personally, I haven't had any issues keeping my dreadlocks separated. I will tell you, as my dreadlocks have gotten older, they require less and less manual separation as they mature. It was definitely something that I had to stay way more on top of as they were baby dreads than, let's say, like the last few months. In fact, now I separate once a week, you know, or whenever I determine that it's needed. It's not so much every single time I get out of the shower. Now, if I do an overhaul and really wash my dreadlocks well, then I make sure to separate after that, because I notice that that will tend to cause the roots to knot together just a little bit and maybe some crossover hair to mix across sections. But aside from that, the older they get, the less you have to separate over time. So, picking right back off of the separation point, I do want to talk a little bit about dreadlock maintenance. Like I've mentioned, I like the look of really tidy, neat, clean kept dreadlocks. And so in the beginning, I was maintaining my dreadlocks quite a bit. And in the beginning, I mean like the first, from installation through the 3-month mark. Now, at this point, they didn't look anything like dreadlocks. They were these long, skinny knot strands with, you know, some frizz around them, and I was constantly trying to tame the frizz down so that they looked a little bit better. Now, at the 3-month mark is when I really kind of started to notice some of my sections had their first mature pieces to them. And so at that point, I loosened up a little bit and I kind of went to maintaining them a little less often. So in the first 3 months, I would say that I maintained them once a week, once every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks as those months started to stretch out a little bit. From the 3 to 6 month mark, I would say I probably maintained them every 2 to 5, maybe 2 to 6 weeks depending. And then anything after the 6 month mark, I've really only maintained them as needed. As my dreadlocks have matured, they have really not needed as much loose hair pulled into the dreadlock down the length. They have needed some loose hair pulled in between the sections, which I've done a small video on this. So I'll make sure to link my palm rolling video and also my maintenance video up in the cards up above, just so you guys, if you want to watch it, you have a link to it there. But as my dreadlocks have gotten older, I've noticed that they've just needed less maintenance. So I do have to say, with me getting ready to install another row of dreadlocks, that's probably what I'm looking forward to the least, is the amount of maintenance brand new baby dreads need in comparison to 1-year-old almost mature dreadlocks. But it's all a part of the process. You know, it's something that you enjoy no matter what. Just take it with a grain of salt and get it done. Another big question that I had before I started my dreadlock journey is how often would dreadlocks need to be washed in comparison to my loose hair? I knew that I would only have a partial set for a while, and so I was really unsure of how I was going to maintain the balance of keeping my loose hair looking nice and well washed, and then also keeping my dreadlocks from drying out too much from overwashing them. So in the beginning, before my loose hair really got used to not being washed as often, I was probably washing it every 2 to 4 days at the very most. Now I can stretch my hair being washed out to like 6 or 7 days at the longest scale of that. There are still times that I wash it every other day just because of things that I need to go do or ways that I want to fix my hair. It does work a little easier if I keep my loose hair clean. But aside from that, as far as dire need on how often I wash my dreadlocks, it really doesn't need it that often, and I would say once a week. I could probably push it to a little longer if I needed to. With that point though, is the products that I use on my hair. Now I did do a products video. I'll put it up in the cards again just so you guys can check that out. But I did that video right around the 7-month mark, and some of the products that I use on my dreadlocks have changed a little bit because my dreadlocks have changed a little bit. So of course I use a residue-free shampoo. Dr. Bronner's is great. There's also a Trader Joe's like tea tree tingle that I really love the sensation on my scalp, so that's what I personally use. But I also am a big fan of Dr. Bronner's as well. It's a great residue shampoo, so you don't have to worry about any of those extra chemicals from shampoo getting stuck inside your dreadlock and creating buildup or anything like that. So definitely I use a residue shampoo. I definitely use a residue-free shampoo, and then I do use a conditioner, but only on my loose hair. I've gone over how I keep those two separate. Of course, you don't want to put any conditioner on your dreadlocks, but I do have to still use it some to keep my loose hair well hydrated and well nourished at this point. Aside from that, I do occasionally put essential oils on my dreadlocks. Like if I notice that they are starting to get really dry, or if I notice that my scalp's getting a little irritated or anything like that, I will use like a tea tree essential oil, or I will use like a lavender essential oil to kind of help my scalp keep the right balance, keep my dreadlocks feeling really good and hydrated. But those are things that are up to you and your preference. If your dreadlocks really don't get overly dry, which I would think with no conditioner your dreadlocks would get dry. Mine do. So if you feel the need to moisturize, I have the best luck with essential oils and things like that. Now one product that was in my 7-month video that I no longer use on my almost mature dreadlocks is salt spray. There's really no need. The salt spray was really to kind of help the knots gain some friction in the beginning and help those knots set in and mature early on in the process. Now that my dreadlocks are mature most of the length down, then I don't really have to use the salt spray anymore. Now, once I install the new row of dreadlocks that's coming up here in the next week or 2 weeks or so, be on the lookout for it, then I will start using salt spray on those again to help speed up the process with them. So salt spray on new dreads, yeah, you probably need it. Salt spray on mature dreads, not so much. Another question that I get pretty often about my partial dreadlocks is, do I ever decorate my dreadlocks? And the answer is not often. I do have like fabric style beads. They're like a dread sleeve that you can slide up the length of your dreadlock, and they're pretty adjustable as to the thickness. But I'll tell you, I bought them when my dreadlocks were babies, and now that they've started to mature, a lot of my dreadlocks are too thick for the sleeves that I have. So I need to get some more dread beads or dread sleeves, whatever you want to call them, so that I can start decorating them that way again. I have on occasion put in some dreadlock wraps in my hair, but I personally don't think it's a great idea or healthy for the dreadlock to leave those wraps in for a long extended period. I just think that you're really squeezing down on that dreadlock in places that's not natural to it, and it has the potential to create breakage, and it also has the potential to create a weak spot in your dreadlocks, especially up top where you tie it into your hair. So whenever I have done decorations, and especially hair wraps on my dreadlocks, I leave them in for a day or two, at the very most 3 days, and then I go ahead and cut them out. And even after 3 days, I have noticed that they have influenced the shape of my dreadlocks, just from where they're being squeezed and where they're being tightened in some places and not others. So I love the way decorated dreadlocks look. I would be wary of keeping them decorated for too long, especially when you go to wash them, because it would hinder and it would prevent your dreadlocks from draining water as well, I would think. But aside from that, I love the look of them. I just don't personally do it very often. Alrighty guys, that wraps up the 1 year update for my dreadlocks. Woo woo, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday. If you guys have any questions that I didn't get to, please drop them down into the comments down below. I am happy to answer those for you. As always, I love to hear what you guys think of the videos, so if you just want to say hello, or let me know about your dreadlock journey, or simply just let me know where you're from, then I'd love to hear from you down in the comments down below as well. So for those of you just tuning into my channel, please consider subscribing. Remember, we do have a new dreadlock installation video that will be dropping in the next 2 weeks, so be sure to turn on that notification bell so that you get notified when it goes live. Alrighty guys, as always, I appreciate you stopping in, tuning in, and hanging out all the way until the end. Until next time, I hope you take it easy, be well, and keep it simple.